The following clip is from the North to South Show, live every Monday and Wednesday at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, where we talk SEC football everything. Now, we'd love to have you out for next show, but for now, hit that like button down below, hit that subscribe button, and enjoy this clip. So let's get into that now. Starting off our rankings of our SEC schedule, starting off with the easiest, which will be 14, going all the way up to what I think is the toughest schedule in all the SEC, which will be number 1. At number 14, I have the Alabama Crimson Tide. Now, Alabama's the best team in the SEC right now. I don't think it's any surprise to say that. I mean, big games that they do go to Florida. They play Miami the first game, which is at a neutral site, and then they also have big games like they go to Texas A&M. Those are going to be your big games. You get LSU at home this season. You get like Mississippi State at home. You go to Auburn. You go to Mississippi State, but then at home you get like Tennessee. You get your LSU. You get Arkansas. Games like that. So I think it's a very, very winnable schedule for Alabama. You don't have any real high-class games. I'm guessing that A&M one is going to be the biggest one of the whole season for Alabama because that's going to kind of determine the West. I think that the Texas A&M game will be more competitive than the Florida game, but the Florida game still 110% should be a great game. So I got Alabama coming in at number 14. Number 13, I have the Texas A&M Aggies. Now, Texas A&M, last season, they got the short end of the stick because they were supposed to have a really, really easy schedule before the whole COVID thing happened. Then they got Florida thrown into their mix out of the SEC East, but they ended up winning that game. And I think that they have a very favorable schedule here. You look at their big games, obviously. You get Alabama at home, which is huge. Kind of the tougher games I look at, going to LSU, going to Ole Miss is going to be a bit tougher. But then you travel neutral site in Colorado, which is a game that we're going to talk about later in the show when we go through our best versus the rest segment, breaking down Colorado and Texas A&M. The elevation of that game is going to be something to think about. It's going to be something interesting, so that's something to think about there. But other than that, like you got Kent State, New Mexico, you get Arkansas at home, you get Mississippi State at home, you travel to Missouri, you travel to LSU, you travel to Ole Miss, and you pretty much get everyone else at home. So I think that the schedule works out really, really nicely for the Texas A&M Aggies this season. So let's now go into number 12. Number 12, we got the Missouri Tigers. I think you're going to see a lot of SEC East teams towards the bottom of this list because SEC West teams, in my opinion, if you just have to play the SEC West slate, it is going to be a much tougher schedule and a much tougher task than going up against the SEC East teams. So we got Missouri here. Missouri's big games, I mean, they get Texas A&M this season in the rotating schedule, but other than that, like you're going to have your classic Georgia and everything like that, and then the out of conference isn't anything terrible. You go to Boston College, and then other than that, you get Central Michigan and you get Southeast Missouri, and then they play the SEC East, which is a bit weaker in my opinion this season compared to what the SEC West has this season, and I think that Missouri is one of the better teams in the SEC East this season, so they should do a pretty good job. So I have Missouri coming in at the number 12 spot. At number 11, we have the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Now, again, this is a West team, but I look at their rotating opponents. The rotating opponents for the SEC East, you get Vanderbilt and Kentucky, which they get to Kentucky every year, and your rotating opponent is Vanderbilt. You do go to Vanderbilt, but I think that's a good thing for Mississippi State. It's a lot easier. You play your SEC West slate. You get Louisiana Tech at home. You get NC State at home, who actually was a good team last year. You go to Memphis, which may be a bit tougher, but other than that, man, you play your regular SEC West slate, and the SEC East rotating schedule is very, very favorable to you this season. And then another out-of-conference opponent that you may play, or that you do play, is Tennessee State. Next up, what are we on? We just did 11. Number 10, I have the Vanderbilt Commodores. Now, Vanderbilt is the doormat of the SEC East. They're the doormat of the SEC, really, because they have struggled the last couple seasons in terms of putting up wins against SEC teams. So not to say that this schedule in terms of Vanderbilt is going to be easy for them, but in terms of looking at opponents, if you're just talking about an average SEC team, this is a pretty easy schedule in terms of SEC schedules because no SEC schedule is going to be easy. None of them. But there are going to be easier ones than others. So Vanderbilt this season, East Tennessee State, you play them. You go to Colorado State, which should be interesting. You get Stanford at home, but then other than that, you get like Georgia, you get Connecticut at home. Go to Florida, go to South Carolina, Mississippi State at home. They're going to be your rotating opponent this year. And then you still get Ole Miss. You travel to Ole Miss, but like You're escaping the Bamas, you're escaping the Texas A&Ms. I do think Ole Miss is a good team this year, but you're escaping like LSU. There are a lot of good SEC West teams that you're escaping. And the out-of-conference opponents, even though they do have to travel to Colorado State, I look at like Stanford, Colorado State, ETSU, and Connecticut, and there's no one that really, really scares me if we're talking about an average SEC team. So I'm putting Vanderbilt in my 10 spot. Coming in at number 9, I have the Kentucky Wildcats. Kentucky Wildcats at number 9. Again, SEC West, SEC East slate. One thing that they do have that is a bit tougher, their rotating SEC West opponent this season is LSU, which they get at home. They also get Florida at home. The toughest thing probably for them is definitely going to have to go to Georgia this season. You go to Louisville as well, but Louisville doesn't scare me as much if you're talking from a Kentucky perspective. I think that should be a really competitive game, but I don't think Louisville's anyone that's going to be jumping out of the schedule at you other than it's a rivalry game. You play New Mexico State, you play Louisiana Monroe, you play Chattanooga, teams like that, and then you always get your rotating SEC West opponent of Mississippi State, who finished last in the division last season. So I think that Kentucky has a pretty favorable schedule this season. You get Florida and LSU at home. The only tough things are that you have to go to Georgia and you have to go to Louisville. So those are kind of the big games that I'm looking at that Kentucky schedule. Coming in at number 8, I have the Tennessee Volunteers. Tennessee Volunteers coming in at 8. I think that, again, you play a regular SEC East slate. They always play Bama each and every season. They play in Bama this season, which is obviously tougher. And I think they play a decent Pitt team also who comes to town, comes to Knoxville week 2. But other than that, you're out of conference opponents. You got Bowling Green, you got Tennessee Tech, and you got South Alabama. And then on top of Pitt, other than that, you travel to Florida. This year, you travel to Missouri, you travel to Alabama, but you get teams like Georgia, South Carolina, Ole Miss, all at home. So you get some big games at home, you get some big games away, but all in all, I just think that the teams above them have some pretty high caliber games on their schedule. So very interesting to see what we have for the rest of it. Coming in at number 7, I have the Georgia Bulldogs. Now, going through some of other people's lists, I saw Georgia very low, which really shocked me because out-of-conference opponents, yes, Georgia plays UAB this season. They play Charleston Southern, and they go to Georgia Tech for the out-of-conference opponents. Nothing scary, but you start open the season, your season opener, in a neutral site against Clemson, who's a team that has made the college football playoff like what? I can't even remember. It was like 2014 that the last time that Clemson didn't make the college football playoff, a team that is constantly being named as one of the top 2 programs in all of the nations. You play them number 1, week 1. You deserve to be really high up on this list. On top of playing an SEC East slate, which obviously you're going to have Florida every single season. What kind of makes this a weaker schedule is that Georgia doesn't have to play themselves out of the SEC East. But on top of that, you still got to play Vanderbilt out of the West, and you play Arkansas this season, who I think is a bit of a dark horse. So I think Georgia's schedule is definitely tougher than a lot of people think it is, because people just underestimate them because they think, oh, you play an SEC East, but guys, they play Clemson game 1. Like, give them some respect for that. Coming in at number 6, I got LSU this season. LSU at number 6, and this is for the reason because they play an all-SEC West slate, obviously. You go to Alabama this season. You do get Texas A&M at home, but other than that, you still have to go to Ole Miss. You go to Mississippi State, and the big game going to UCLA. If you've seen the lines and everything like that, I did my early prediction on this game, and I had it being a lot closer than what most LSU fans will say the final score is going to be. That could be a trap game for sure. You never want to travel coast to coast, basically. I know LSU isn't technically on the East Coast, but still, they're pretty far from LA. So that's going to be a far travel. It's kind of a trap first game, so that's going to be difficult. And then always going to Alabama is going to be tough. And then out of the SEC East this season, you get Florida always, and then you also have to play, who's their other SEC East opponent? You have to play Kentucky, which should be an interesting game. Kentucky's always an underrated team every single season. You travel to Kroger Field for that game. Coming in at my number 5 spot, I got the Florida Gators. Now, Florida plays Florida Atlantic at South Florida. You play Florida State each and every season, and you play Samford. But you got to play your Georgia. You got to play at LSU, and then you still got to play Alabama this season on top of all the other SEC East teams. So you're getting the short end of the stick there. Anytime that you have to play both Georgia and Alabama this season is going to be definitely one of the harder schedules of anyone's schedules all season. So Florida, I think, again, this was a team when I was looking at other people's rankings of the schedules and everything like that, it looked like people weren't giving them the respective strength of schedule that they deserve. So I'm giving it to them here. I put Florida at number 5. At number 4, I have Ole Miss. Now, Ole Miss opens up the season in a very interesting game, a Monday game against Louisville, which is in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, I'm pretty sure, in Atlanta, Georgia. Other than that, you play Austin Peay, who was the team that we all watched to kick off the college football season last year because that was the only game that was on them against Central Arkansas. I remember that was the first college football game of the whole season. Tulane, you go to Alabama, you go to Tennessee, you still got to play LSU, you go to Auburn, Texas A&M at home. But then another piece about this that people do not look at, you play Liberty, let's not forget, they took down Coastal Carolina in their bowl game, and Liberty had a very, very good season last year. Very excited to see what Ole Miss and Liberty are able to do, because usually when you schedule these out-of-conference games, like you look at Liberty, on paper, like just seeing Liberty's logo, you're not like, oh, that's a good football team. That's a possible loss scenario. But if you watched Liberty last year and know the quality of football team that they actually have over there, that is a very, very interesting game for Ole Miss. So Ole Miss's schedule, I put them up at number 4 because they do have that one opponent that is not supposed to be good, but they are going to be good this season. Number 3, I have Auburn, which these top 3 could all be shaken up. Like you could toss all of the 3 of them in a bag and pull out whichever one for number 1, and I wouldn't disagree because they are all really, really tough schedules. But I have, who did I say? My number 3 is Auburn. You play Akron. You play Alabama State. You play Georgia State. Those are your out-of-conference opponents. But then obviously the big one, week 3, you travel to Happy Valley, which just got released. That is going to be a night game. Very interesting scenario to go in there. First of all, who's going to be Auburn's quarterback for that game? And is that going to be a whiteout in general? Because that will make a huge difference. I still think that whatever atmosphere going into will be very, very intimidating. But I think the whiteout changes things just a bit. You still got to go to LSU. You play Georgia each and every season. You got Alabama at home. You go to South Carolina. You go to Texas A&M, and then play the rest of your SEC West opponents. Obviously, going to Penn State, even though that Penn State wasn't the greatest of teams last year, I still look at them and be like, that environment just alone, their fans, is not a place that you want to go to on your schedule. You do not want to see at Penn State on anyone's schedule. If it's Penn State at home at Jordan-Hare, I think we're talking a different scenario, but that's not what we got. We got Auburn going to Penn State, so I put them at my number 3. Number 2, I got my South Carolina Gamecocks, which it seems like each and every single season, we are constantly playing one of the toughest schedules in all of the nation. We get Eastern Illinois. We got to travel to East Carolina. We get Troy at home. And then, obviously, to finish off the season, we play Clemson. We still got your Georgia. We traveled to Georgia this season. Early in the season, I'm pretty sure we play them week 3. We got Florida at home, which is nice. We travel to A&M, which is never easy. We've never played good in A&M. We haven't played good against A&M ever, home or away, because we've never beat them. But it's just going to be, you play your Clemsons, your Floridas, your Georgias, your Texas A&Ms, and those 4 teams right there are 4 teams that you do not want to see on your schedule. But other than that, I still think Kentucky is going to be a competitive game. I think that Missouri is going to be a really competitive game, and that kind of scares me that we have to go to Missouri as well. And then we also get Auburn in the SEC West rotating team, who could be an underrated team in that division. So that's why I have my South Carolina Gamecocks at the number 2 slot, and then finishing up with my number 1 slot. If you haven't figured out who it is by process of elimination, I'm going with the Arkansas Razorbacks. I mean, Arkansas has to play a SEC West slate, which I feel like I'm constantly repeating myself when I'm saying, oh, this team has to play an SEC West slate, which is kind of obvious, but you play Missouri every season as your SEC East opponent, and then your rotating team. This year, you go to Georgia. That's not going to be tough. That's not going to be easy. You go to Alabama. Not going to be easy. You still play Texas A&M at home. You go to Ole Miss. You get Auburn at home. You go to LSU. Like, look at that. You go to LSU, Alabama, and Georgia. That is not easy on itself. And I haven't even thrown in the big week 2 game. Even though that this game is at home, I think that you do not want to see this team on your schedule no matter what. You still got the Texas Longhorns at home, which I think will be more competitive game than a lot of people think. But Texas does make the schedule a lot harder on top of having 3 insanely tough environments to go into as a road team. And then on top of that, you still got to play your A&Ms and your Ole Misses and all those other fun teams that you got over there in the West. So that is my rankings. I have Bama 14, A&M 13, Missouri 12, Mississippi State 11, Vanderbilt 10, Kentucky 9, Tennessee 8, Georgia 7, LSU 6, Florida 5, Ole Miss 4, 3, Auburn 3, South Carolina 2, and then Arkansas finishing up at my number 1 spot.